on state and stability of seagrass ecosystems in Biscayne Bay. So Biscayne Bay, as I don't need to tell anyone in this room, is experiencing increased disturbances. And this is like coastal ecosystems worldwide. And these disturbances are affecting ecological processes across scales. These are leading to differences in disturbance legacies that can have implications for ecosystem state and stability. And so when I say ecosystem state, what do I mean? I mean the condition of the ecosystem at a given time. And over here we have a diagram that kind of shows the classic ball and cup model, which is a way to describe ecosystem state and how you have different alternate ecosystem states, but that they don't always exist in the same desirability for ecosystem services, ecosystem function. And so we can see here we have three different alternate stable states, and that depending on disturbances and recovery, we can exist in these different kind of basins of this ball and cup model. And so historically, ecosystem state has been defined with things like single metrics, things like seagrass cover, or on a single scale, so like focusing just on the patch level or just at the seascape level. But because these processes are happening at different scales, it's important to combine these things together to get a description of state that incorporates both scales. And so within Biscayne Bay, we're having stressors such as declining water quality, land use change, urban development, and things like climate change, which is going to alter our states. And so I don't really have to go into much detail with this. Callie did a great job, but some of the examples of the large-scale seagrass disturbance we had in the Julia Tuttle Basin or in the central inshore bay, where we're seeing these really large losses of seagrass. And so what we wanted to do is kind of understand what are the different ecosystem states of seagrass across Biscayne Bay, and how are they changing over time. And so to do this, we combined the DERM monitoring SAV habitat program, and we looked at three different SA patch metrics. We looked at total seagrass cover, we looked at total macroalgal cover, and then the dominance of thalassia. So basically what that means is how much of the community is thalassia relative to the other species that are there. And then we combined that with habitat maps that we derived from satellite imagery, and we used three seascape metrics from these maps. We used the total amount of dense seagrass, the total amount of macroalgal habitat, and then the fragmentation of seagrass. And so what we did is we combined these together. We overlaid hexagons across the bay, and these points are the DERM monitoring stations across the time period that we used, which was 2016 to 2024, which is when we had the matching DERM data and the satellite imagery. And we basically characterized the state for each year and each polygon. And we did this by combining our different metrics. And if you want to know about how we did this, you can talk to me after. And what we did is we defined state at each year and each hexagon, and we did a clustering to figure out what are the different states based on these six metrics. And so what we found, and Rollo kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier in the morning session, found that there were 7 different seagrass states across Biscayne Bay. And here across this diagram, and one thing I want to point out, we have them organized by color. Basically from brown is going to be the most bare, the state that has the least seagrass, all the way up to teal, which is going to be the state that has the most seagrass. And what we found is that it really differentiated on two things. At the patch level, it was really the dominance of seagrass. And so 5 of the 7 states had kind of this mid-thalassia dominance. Thalassia is there, but it's not really the only thing there. We had one state which was high thalassia dominance, and this is basically the majority of the community is thalassia. And then our 7th state actually had low thalassia dominance. And what that means is it had thalassia, but it was also made up of different seagrass species like Halodule and Saragonium. And then the second thing that we found is that they were organized across this gradient across the seascape. And here it's organized by the amount of seagrass, but we have continuous and fragmented, kind of this bare. We have fragmented seagrass for 2 of the states, and then we have this more continuous where we have either just continuous seagrass or continuous mixed SAV, so seagrass and the macroalgal habitat. And so everything's going to be organized in the same way. So if you think about it, anything to the left is going to be worse, and anything to the right is going to be better. And so what we found is that our states varied in occurrence. The most common one was our low thalassia dominance continuous mixed SAV, so that's good. That's kind of our best state. But the second most common is that bare habitat. Well, and I guess we have maybe the third most, but we have a large occurrence of that kind of barren state. And if we look at where these occur, this is every time that it occurred across space, across any of the years, we can see that we have spatial clusterings of where these states exist. And so if we look at the bare states, they're really kind of occurring more in the southern part of the bay and more in the deeper areas. And if we look at more of the continuous seagrass states, they're occurring more in the shallow areas and kind of more in the areas that we're seeing near shore and shallow. And so here, this is showing you across all years in that hexagon what was the most dominant state. So this is the state that occurred the most times compared to everything else. And kind of what we can see is that these bare states are really happening in the areas where we're seeing hard bottom habitat, which makes a ton of sense. This isn't the best area for seagrass to grow. And the highest habitat amounts, kind of like I said before, really we're seeing these in the near shore. These are the areas where the most seagrass are, in these shallow near shore areas. And these are likely related to environmental gradients and disturbance regimes that are existing in the bay. And so in this graph, what we did was we looked at what was your state in 2016 at the beginning of our time series, and what was your state in 2024. And if it's brown, it means you shifted left, you got worse state, and if you're green, you shifted to the right. And so we're seeing that it kind of really depends on where you are, and the no change means that you're the same state as the 9 years before. We're seeing some spatial variation we're seeing some areas getting better, we're seeing some areas getting worse, but we're really seeing that there's a slight higher number of areas that are getting worse, and they're really kind of clustered in the areas near Key Biscayne, and then kind of in this the southern part of the bay in between Black Point and Turkey Point. And so why does this matter? So here what I'm plotting is trophic function, which is basically how are these ecosystems supporting things like fisheries. And so and what we can see is that depending on the state, there's a clear gradient in how they can actually support fisheries. And so this state, as we go right, we see that there's higher ecosystem function. And so it's important for us to kind of understand this, to understand how these changes in state are going to affect the ecosystem functioning. And then the last thing that we did is we actually related the different states to water quality parameters. We found that there were 3 things that related to the proportion of occurrence of the different states. And so here we can see there was, with temperature, the low thalassia dominance continuous mixed SAV class, this is our state, this is the one that's occurring more in those nearshore areas. And this is the annual temperature. We can see that in areas that there is a higher annual temperature, we're seeing higher occurrence of the state, but this is likely related to the depth. And it may not be that if things are getting warmer, we're going to get better states. It's probably because of where they're occurring in space. We also saw this strong threshold response with salinity, where especially at this 30 ppt, which is the transition from the polyhaline to the euhaline, we're seeing this shift in which states occur, which is really cool. And then the third thing we found was that in relation to total phosphorus, we're seeing that there is an increase in this low thalassia dominance in the higher phosphorus environment. And this is likely due because in the higher phosphorus, you'd expect more haliduli to occur than thalassia. And so it's likely that that's what we're seeing with this response. And so in summary, what do we find? Well, we found that there were 7 seagrass states, that they were spatially arranged, likely due to the environmental gradients. We did see that there was a slight temporal decline in state. We did see some improvements in some areas, but kind of overall there was more decline than there was increase. We also found that the states don't provide the same ecosystem functions, and especially for fisheries support, and that these were related to water quality. And like to thank our funding sources and all that helped out with the project, and I'll take any questions anybody has.